I would ask for a nomination and a vote. So are there any nominations for a temporary chair?
I'll nominate Darren Short.
Second?
Second.
Hold a vote? Yes.
I think we're
Yes.
getting railroaded into this, yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Commissioner Greeno.
Yes.
Okay, then. I guess in a way, we've already called this meeting to order. I guess we can take a roll call. Follow along with the agenda.
Commissioner Tompkins,
Here.
Commissioner Wright.
Here.
Commissioner Greeno.
Here.
Acting Chair Short.
I am here. Thank you. Would you all join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, at this time, it's our public comment period. Any member of the public may address the Solid Waste Management Authority on any manner on or off the agenda. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to make their comment. Is there any general public comment? Seeing no public comment, we'll close public comment period and move on to our consent agenda. We have 3 items. The approval of the minutes from the regular session of Tuesday, the 17th, December 17th, 2024. Second one is pay claim number 10009 to the California Product Stewardship Council in the amount of $6,462.54 for invoice 39-011 for services related to marine flare collection event. And the third item is approve a budget transfer for fiscal year 24-25 in the amount of $6,350. Do we have any public comment on the consent agenda item? Seeing no public comment, bring it back to the authority members for any questions or possibly a motion.
I move we accept the consent agenda.
Second.
We got a motion and a second for approval of consent agenda items. Would you please poll the vote?
Commissioner Tompkins.
Yes.
Commissioner Greeno.
Yes.
Commissioner Wright.
Yes.
Acting Chair Short.
Yes. Moving on to director's reports.
Okay, so director's report is generally the time when I breeze over the things that are in the agenda and I cover the things that are not otherwise discussed in the agenda. So I appreciate your approval of the budget transfer. The budget transfer was paid for by the credit card service fees. I'm delighted that our credit card service fees have gone down significantly since we've gone to a new card services company. However, that's not without hiccups and that our current card services are having problems today. So, but we are saving money in the process. Agenda's item 4.1 will be talking about the Del Norte County Transfer Station permit review. 4.2 talks about recycling and roofing materials at the small volume transfer stations in Gaskin and Klamath. 5.1 discusses the Smith River community recycling bin. And towards that end, last Friday, Huamua and Brandon Hendricks of the Del Norte County Health Department met with Kira and I to discuss their concerns about trash around the recycling bins at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. And that'll be one of several items that we'll be discussing with John Perry of Recology in the coming weeks. But essentially, we view the cleanup of the trash around the recycling areas as primarily Recology's responsibility, but it is a shared responsibility. Our staff do it, Hambro staff do it. It's a common facility, but we don't ever want to fall on the wrong side of the inspections. So we're going to step up our game, and we've already taken some steps to do that. But I did promise the health department that they would get a written response back about what we're doing about that. So that will happen. Let's see, under grants and compliance on agenda item 6.2 talks about the first of several community meetings that we're going to be having under the guidance of the Del Norte Solid Waste Task Force. And essentially these community meetings will be planning how our community will be complying with SB 1383, which calls for us to re-examine how we're managing organic waste, because organic waste placed in the landfill create methane. That's a more potent greenhouse gas. And so CalRecycle is, in urban communities, they're separating their food waste and having separated food waste collections and food waste processing. We hope to avoid that severity of program, but we do plan on doing things differently. And so we're going to have a series of community meetings to talk about options we might have and what we pursue. Also, the task force has a lot on its plate this year. They're also conducting the 5-year review of our recycling and composting and special waste and household hazardous waste programs. These programs were first laid out in the countywide integrated waste management plan. And so that laid out all the different recycling programs that we have. And those are updated through the electronic annual report process that Kira does each year. And so we'll be going through all of the programs with the task force as a separate set of activities in addition to these community. And towards that end, actually, Katie Koch from CalRecycle is coming to visit us Thursday. And as part of her responsibilities on oversight for SB 1383, she's not only meeting with us, but I understand she's also meeting with county folks looking at their purchasing. As we discussed many times about SB 1383, while the authority is eager to try to develop our overall solid waste recycling and composting programs, there are responsibilities with respect to procurement and green building codes that are not the responsibility of this agency. And so consequently, CalRecycle is broadening their conversations to not only us, but also the respective city and county departments. Let's see, towards that end, on outreach, Katie Koch from CalRecycle will be joining us on our radio program at KFUG called Rethinking Recycling, which should be back on the air at 10 a.m. on Thursday morning. So glad to see KFUG's back broadcasting. So that concludes the director's report. I'd be happy to move on to financial reports if you don't have any questions.
A quick question about the new credit card company. Have they been receptive to your needs so far?
Mostly. This is currently, we're just having a problem with the chip reader. So I'm not sure if it's an equipment problem or if it's a software problem. We've also had connection issues on our online connection to that. So we rely on our tech, Andrew Butcher of Digital Needs Services, to look into that. So he's currently.
Okay.
Any other questions? Okay, Director Ward, going
Okay.
on financials, I guess.
2.2 is the balance sheet for Councilmember Wright. It comes from the county's auditor's office, and essentially it's like the cash balance of your checking account. So it doesn't really give us the accruals and receipts and receivables, but it does tell us how much we've got in the bank at the time that they produce the report. So in 2023, we finally, this as an agency, got into the black. So this report tells us that we have 2.840 million in the bank, plus we have 198,177 for essentially last month's payment at the Delaware County Transfer Station. So those two amounts are the total that we have in the bank. The AR aging summary looks at all of the different commercial accounts at the Delaware County Transfer Station and the status of their indebtedness or collections. And usually once it gets over 90 days, Kathy Brewer is pretty prompt in turning those delinquent accounts over to collection. So that gives you an overview of about how we're doing in terms of accounts. On item 2.3, you've got claims approved by director. So this is all of the different claims that we've spent money on in the last month. And as is usual, the largest expense goes to Hambro WSG for the good services that they provide at the Del Norte County Transfer Station. And the second largest expense in the last month has been the interfund cost plan to the county, because this agency pays the county for personnel services, for IT services, and so that ends up being monthly expense and auditing services. Moving on to items to 2.4, this gives the totals for the December's activities at our various facilities. And item 2.5 gives the authority revenue report. This is a report I give every month, but essentially the quick and dirty summary is for this agency, the two main sources of income are the fees that we receive at the Del Norte County Transfer Station and the franchise fees that we receive from Recology. And so if those two income items are at or above budget, and we're balancing accounts as we do with the budget transfers, then generally that's a quick and dirty summary of saying financially we're in pretty good shape. So that's what this report is telling us again. Here, halfway through the fiscal year, at the end of December, our income at the transfer station was 84,500 ahead of budget, and the income from the franchise fees was 14,619 ahead of budget. So at the midpoint of the year, our income lines are $99,205 ahead of budget. So our financial house seems to be in pretty good order. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Nope. We'll move on.
Okay. This item, if I could have the first slide, please, Mackenzie. So this is a status report regarding the preparation of the 5-year permit review for the Del Norte County Transfer Station by EBA. EBA is the same engineering firm that recently completed the 5-year permit review at the Del Norte at the Crescent City landfill, and it's a similar level of work looking at what the legal requirements are and our documentation of our activity. So this is the updated site layout for 2025. Pretty much only two things have changed. Right where it says transfer station building in very fine print, you'll see sharps, batteries, and e-waste. That used to be in a slightly different location, so it's now moved. So it's not taking up a lane that could be used by customers at the unloading bays. And then the other thing that's changed is up at the tops, you see a blue box that says storage and oil spill kits. So those two things are the two items that got changed on this overall site plan. And so we expect that their permit update work will be relatively straightforward. But that's the update. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Nope. Guess that's it. So moving on to 4.2.
Okay, 4.2. So this is an area where I'm looking for the authority board's advice. We have a challenge in Gasky and Klamath. When customers in Gasky and Klamath want to bring us concrete, essentially, if you fill 1/4 of one of those 40-yard bins with concrete, you've reached your maximum weight. There isn't more material that you can put in there because if there's too much material, Recology's trucks can't even lift the bin. So that's exactly the situation that we faced over the weekend in Gasky. And essentially there was too much concrete in one of the bins. Recology went up there and tried to empty the bin. They couldn't pick it up. We had to go pay Dave Mason to take out some of that concrete and dispose of it separately. And of course, in the meantime, that bin is full and not moving. So it's inconveniencing customers. So before the board, there are 3 options. Essentially, do as we've been doing and just make sure our gate staff know that when there's concrete in the bin, it needs to be closed sooner. So that's option 3. Option 1 is to stop accepting roofing waste, asphalt, or concrete in Gasky and Klamath. That would solve this problem, but it would be a customer inconvenience. And then option 2 is essentially placing some limits on how much concrete, roofing, or asphalt that a customer can bring in on any one day to the Gasky or Klamath transfer stations. And that limit would be imposed by our gate staff. But essentially, it would try to split the difference between if you have a little bit of concrete, you can still bring it to these facilities, but you can't bring in so much that we don't have capacity to serve any other customers.
So how often does that issue arise?
Not very often. This is the first time that I've seen it in the last 10 years. John, do you recall another? Not very often. Is the short of it.
May
but-
I ask?
Yes.
May I ask why they aren't required for something like that to get their own bins, to get their own.
Well, we don't require anyone to sign up for a bin with Recology. And the services that are at the Gasky and Klamath and Del Norte County transfer stations are available to the people who show up. So we don't, when those
Yeah.
customers arrive, we don't say, did you sign up with Recology? That's just not part of our process.
Yeah,
So this is something that's kind of an anomaly. We could put in a requirement that if the bin is full for that day, maybe they come back the next day to dispose of the rest of it.
So
Would that
the other thing that's worth keeping in mind for Gasky and Klamath is they're only the Gasky facility during the winter is only open 1 day a week.
Oh,
The Klamath facility is open 2 days a week. During the summer, they each get an extra day. So Gasky is open 2 days a week, and Klamath is open 3 days a week. But for construction contractors and people doing this kind of work, I mean, oftentimes they really value the cost of their labor.
mhm.
And so they're hesitant to drive all the way up to Crescent City to unload the material and then drive back. And so they're eager to use whatever services will allow them to use gas climate. But it does get to the point where sometimes they use the services and then that incurs a much greater expense than any other customer.
Okay.
That's what we face.
And when people are unloading the concrete, does the gate staff monitor that?
They assess the loads before the customer unloads. So
Okay.
they should know whether there's concrete in a load before a customer unloads. Some people will try to hide things under the base of their loads, but concrete is usually it will report itself. Thunk, thunk, thunk.
Right.
so how do they pay for this service?
Yes.
How does that work?
In the Gasky and Klamath transfer stations, they're charged by the cubic yard. And so the gate attendant will measure the load, write up the dimensions, do the math on the receipt, take the payment, and then have the customer unload. That's the way the procedure is supposed to work.
And I'm wildly guessing that installing a weigh station there would be ridiculously too expensive for the.
I think
It
that's a
wouldn't
good
work.
assessment. Yes, ridiculously too expensive. And core to that is neither of these facilities have power,
Yeah.
and any scale you're going to put out there will require.
Mhm.
Is it Solid Waste Management Authority staff that are manning the gates there?
Yes.
Wondering what Recology would like to see happen. And not cost of this doesn't, I mean, did the Dave Mason cost fall on Recology or did it fall on the authority?
That's our cost. And my view of
So-
that is that we're responsible for the gates, and our gate attendants are responsible for closing the bins when they're full. And so if there's training for our staff to be done, then we're responsible for that. And they are the only people who are out there as staff. So they run those facilities.
So if I was to bring a truckload or trailer load of concrete to the transfer station, I would be dumping it out back in the pile of concrete, correct? Unless I wanted to pay a higher
Potentially.
rate.
Just so we can review the rules on concrete. We accept concrete for a reduced rate, about a third of the price of trash. But the rule is the largest dimension on any chunk is 18 inches, and there's no steel involved at all. Many people are breaking up foundations or driveways, and they've got reinforced steel, so they've got protruding rebar. And our rule on that is we can take the concrete with the rebar as regular solid waste. It won't go into the concrete pile for reuse or repurposing. And the longest extension of any piece of steel out of any chunk of concrete can't be longer than 3 inches. And the reason for that is, again, practical, because when we put those pieces of concrete into the outbound trailer headed for the landfill, if they have those protruding pieces of steel, they can punch right through the sidewalls of those tractors and then hang them all up, which is a big problem because the outbound trailers that go to the Dry Creek landfill once they arrive at the Dry Creek landfill, they drive onto a lift gate, and that whole lift gate lifts the whole truck. So that's all empties out the back. And if you've got any, say, concrete that's hung up on the sidewall, that can block the whole thing, blocks all of the traffic in that facility. So it's potentially a very big problem. And so we have these additional rules about how we manage concrete.
Not very friendly on the trailers either. But this is kind of a tough one. I was just thinking that, I was gonna go out there and plan on dumping concrete. We don't have a concrete pile at the Klamath or the gas stations, so I would say, oh, haul that sucker into town. You gotta take it to the transfer station. But it's not necessarily so that all of the concrete would go in the concrete pile because there's limitations. So, yeah, this is a interesting conversation.
Well, also, it's not really something that happens all the time, is what it sounds like. It's kind of an anomaly. So maybe the staff just closes the bin and that's it for until it can be emptied. It's
And to be clear, staff are fine with any of these three options. So if that's what you would like to do, that's fine.
I would say give Recology the, what they would like, the option they would like. Or use the option that Recology would be happiest with.
Okay.
My thought is not to go from everything's fine to absolutely nothing. Let's try that step in between.
Yeah.
Like Mr. Greeno said, it doesn't happen that often, so we could go to that first step and then see what Recology says. This is working fine. If Ambrose not having any trouble with it, fine.
It might be worth the board's information for me to add to the conversation I had with the gentleman, because our gate staff at the time basically knew that this might be an issue, and so she actually we had a conversation, and the person who was unloading the concrete was very eager to get the job done, and they just wanted to dump as much concrete as they could in the bin. I tried to explain our operational challenges, and basically he said, so that's your deal. I still want to use the services, which is understandable. But consequent, so we didn't have a rule at it, and our gate staff were perhaps a little undertrained in terms of recognizing that we needed to close the bin a little earlier. But we can fix the training part. But the customer, I believe, is reasonably representative of customers in those areas because they want to use the services at those facilities, and I don't blame them.
I don't really want to put a limitation on the amount that people can bring, since this is an anomaly. I mean, I don't think that we should make policy concerning one issue if it's an issue that's only going to happen once every 10 years. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So, as I said, if the bin's full, we close the bin, and unfortunately for that day, it's unavailable.
Okay. So what I hear you is choosing option 3, which is make no changes apart from our staff training.
Yeah, let's make a policy that if there is a policy, or if there's not a policy, that if it's full, can't put any more in it.
Fair
You know?
enough.
I mean, that's common sense to me, isn't it?
Common sense is
So
funny word
the reality and the reason I want to drag you all through this because
Okay.
you're giving us guidance. But so for instance, with that customer,
Mhm.
he probably would have used up all of the capacity at the Gasky facility, and we would have had to close that day because he would have come back with another load of concrete. He would have filled the other bin, and that's all the service capacity that we have. Because again, you fill either of those bins with a quarter bin full with concrete.
So this is a garbage bin.
This is a
what you're
garbage
talking
bin.
about. Okay.
Yeah.
So when the garbage bins become full, does Recology come up same day and
They can't do
haul
it the
them away?
same day.
They
They
can't.
have to do it several days later, and it's part of the schedule. So
Okay.
if a bin fills up at noon on a Saturday in Gasky and both bins are full, we're done for the day.
I would just like to note that on option 2, where we're limiting, concrete limited to 2 cubic yards, that's an awful lot of concrete. I mean, that's a really heavy pickup load of concrete. And 5 yards, that's a half a dump truck load. So I think limiting it to those amounts is relatively reasonable when you're talking about shutting down the facility possibly. So, and I don't know if you wanted to say something to chime into the conversation here, your input would be pretty valuable.
There is another option, and that's to have a box there for concrete all the time. But that's something else. It doesn't happen a lot, so there's probably not that need for that, but that is another option. And we only haul concrete in 10-yard boxes. We have 40-yard boxes that are there. So when we say the box is full, we have to understand that when you put any amount of concrete in a 40-yard box and then 40 yards of garbage on top of it, it's way too heavy. So
Okay.
that's what happened this last time. So it's hard for them to judge that. Like, you throw 10 yards or 4 yards or 2 yards of concrete in the box, and then you don't know how much the garbage is going to weigh that you're putting on top of it. So it's really hard for them to visualize it, see it, and judge it. So they might get one truck that has 2 yards. That bin might not get picked up that week. It might not be ready to go because they don't just haul it frivolously. They wait until it's full. 2 weeks later, you could have another attendant. They could put another yard of concrete, so it can be, and then it can be comp roofing. There can be this. And so when it just, that's the problem with the weight. Not everybody's going to see what's going in because it takes a lot of time. But there is, we always can provide another box for those materials. The problem is it's only a 10-yard box. And then, there would be obviously additional fees for that. But as far as the limit, I do agree that, there should be a limit. The tough thing is, like I said, is when these don't run it every week, you don't know what's in there. And it doesn't happen a lot. This is the first time I think we've had to say we can't pick it up off the ground. So it's not really a lot of good information for you, but, so there's different options. But
You being the hauler and the expert, would that be your preferred?
if it was
Would that-
separated,
Yeah. If you
Absolutely.
had an extra box, a
yeah,
10-yard box?
absolutely. But I understand also that that's a hard thing because it might sit there for, a long, long time and not gain
So what are
enough.
we talking about as far as cost?
I'm sorry.
What are we talking about as far as increased cost with that?
That's something I'd have to discuss with Ted. I don't think
Okay.
it's in our contract or it might be. There probably is a rate for a concrete box. We have that. So yeah, we would just have to look that up. It's not
Yeah,
something we do a lot of.
we could talk about that option. The board was interested in pursuing it, but the short of it is there's only so many unloading bays. And so there's, in Gasky, there's one for brush and there's 2 for trash. If we were to try to add a concrete bin, it would either have to be flat on the ground or it would be replacing one of those other.
Yeah, and it is
Is
a
there-
low profile box.
Is there something wrong with it being on the ground?
No, that's how most people use it. Yeah, because it's not.
I mean, I
It's
don't want
not-
to lift
that's all, so.
concrete up high.
The challenge with the concrete box, which we haven't considered before, is that it's not something I regularly see in demand, and it would have to be monitored in the same way to make sure that nothing concrete, no steel is the only material that can go in there. The concrete with steel still would need to go in the trash, and it would add complications.
And so over the course of the time frame that you've been director, is this the first time this has ever happened? With
At
this?
the transfer stations, at the outlying transfer stations, this is the first time since I've been director that I'm aware of.
Okay.
So it is an infrequent occurrence.
I personally don't believe in making policy concerning one particular situation. So I move that we make no changes.
We've got a motion to make no changes. Is there a second?
Second,
Got a motion and a second. Any further public comment? Hey, Kara, would you pull the vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins,
yes.
Commissioner Greeno,
Yes.
Commissioner Wright, Acting Chair Short.
I'll say yes as well. Okay.
Thank you so much for that discussion. I do really appreciate the board's engagement. If we could have the next slide, Mackenzie. So this item is merely a status report Recology, under their agreement, is required to provide community drop-off recycling bins. And for years, those two bins in Smith River have been behind the Smith River Post Office and at the Howanquet RV Resort. And so this map shows those two no signs indicating where those former locations were, and the happy face indicates the location where those bins have been relocated behind a fence that is and it's got a gate that's opened in the morning and closed at night. So it's not available 24/7. But the good news, I'm very, very happy to report, is that those bins, since they've been placed behind the fences, have been recycled. Those materials were no longer disposed as being overly contaminated, but they had a lower level contamination, about 10%. So those materials placed in those bins did actually get recycled. So this is a status report. This is I appreciate Recology's efforts to move those bins, and this seems to be a better location. I'm a little chagrined about the people on the north end of Smith River having to go further, but I think in general, everybody who uses the recycling bins would far prefer to have the materials recycled than disposed.
I'm assuming Recology's happy now. Right on. Good to know. Look, we made a good decision.
And I was going to say, this is potentially just a stopgap measure until we can figure out what we're doing with the northern transfer station, correct?
Yes. Should the northern transfer station be developed at some point, then the recycling bins.
Good. Okay, we'll move on to 6.1, discussion and possible action regarding guiding principles for legislative advocacy.
So this is something we do every year, and the reason being that there are often a lot of solid waste related bills, and many of them we've discussed over the years. And so it's useful to staff to have these guiding principles of legislative advocacy, essentially establishing what this board has set as direction previously, so that if there's a bill that impacts any of these directions, that then we can weigh in on it, knowing that we're acting as the board would want us to act. But we always want to have the board fully engaged to the extent possible. So if there's time, we'll always draft letters as advocacy for legislation. And if there's time to have it presented to the board and actually vote on it before it's sent, that is our preferred option. But when timely response is required, and it seems like our board would have something to say on it, then we follow these guiding principles, we draft a letter, we engage the chair to get approval or signature on that letter, and then it gets reported at the subsequent board meeting. So you're never out of the loop, but this allows for quick response so that if there is a piece of legislation that the board would want response on, we're prepared to do so. So except for the yellow highlighted materials, these have all been reviewed previously by previous boards and approved. So this really hasn't changed in the last year, except for the highlights at the bottom of where it says item 9. And this has to do with the California Redemption Value Buyback Centers. That's the places where you get your nickels back from your bottles and cans, like Hambro Recycling. And staff are suggesting that we add the following. The authority also supports having the CRV program include supports for refill and only include beverage containers that can actually and practically be refilled or recycled into new beverage containers. The reason for this is wine boxes. Recently, the bottle bill has been expanded, and at the same time, there was a far-reaching piece of legislation called SB 54 that essentially regulated single-use packaging and foodware. And so at the time, essentially, Gallo was very eager for the glass that is in wine bottles. And so they wanted to be included in the bottle bill program rather than SB 54. But that includes all wine and liquor beverage containers. So wine boxes got included and quickly folded into the program. The problem is wine boxes aren't recyclable. The bladders on the inside are made of rubber that's not recyclable. And you have to separate those bladders from the cardboard box on the outside, which might be recyclable if you could separate out the bladders. Joel can tell you all about this. But essentially, the general principle is if you're going to charge a deposit so that a material can get recycled, first, that material has to be recyclable. Otherwise, you're wasting everybody's time and kind of lying. So that's the one change. I'd be happy to answer any questions or dive into any of the details if the board's interested, but staff recommend approval.
Very easy. Any comments from the board? None? Any public comment on this item? Candace, could you step up to the mic if you would, so we can get it on, all recorded?
This is actually a serious question, but I'm not, it probably won't sound like it. Are you saying if you take the bladders out and you just fold your wine box and put it, that is recyclable? Not to get funding for it, just to put it in your recycling bin?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I just
If
wanted to
you're at
clarify
home
that.
and you're looking at your recycling bin
Not
and
that I would
you're
ever
looking
do
at your
that.
wine box and saying, how can I put this in the bin? Yes.
Okay.
Open up the box, pull
Yeah.
out the bladder, flatten the box, put the box in the
Because
recycling bin.
those
and
are
put the
generally
bladder in
pretty
the front.
heavy duty, and I wouldn't want the public thinking, oh, yeah, that's more things to go in the trash. So sorry about that.
No, that's fine. Okay. There. Sorry, I'm going back and forth on my agenda here. Any action on that item?
A vote would be great. Consensus direction would be okay.
I move that we approve the amended guiding principles for legislative advocacy.
Thank you.
I'll second that.
Motion in a second. Seeing no further public comment. Sarah, would you pull the vote, please?
Commissioner Tompkins,
Yes.
Commissioner Greeno,
Yes.
Commissioner Wright,
Yes.
Acting Chair Short,
Yes. Okay, our last item on the agenda, discussion and possible action regarding the first of a series of community planning meetings on January 29th, 2025 at 3 p.m. right here in the Del Norte County Board of Supervisors chambers.
Yep.
Word.
Thank you, sir. So this is the first of about a half dozen community meetings we'll be planning for this next year, looking at all the different ways that we might be able to manage organic materials so that they're have less of a greenhouse gas impact when placed in landfills. So the first meeting will be here on January 29th at 3 o'clock. Draft agenda is there, but essentially we'll be providing an overview of what the law is asking for us to do, looking at our assets, our needs, and our challenges, and trying to do these things. But this is a good time to dream and dream big. But the short of it is the reason why we need to go through these community planning processes is whatever facility gets developed will be expensive. It will be a community investment. And so those decisions don't come easily, especially when our community doesn't have a lot of resources. So we want to make sure that we're making the right decisions, that everybody's behind them, and that we're making those investments as wisely as we can. So if you're interested in that discussion, please, you're welcome. January 29th here at the Board of Supervisors chambers, starting at 3 o'clock.
Okay. I want to answer to my big question. How's that rural exemption going to work? Go up to the meeting.
We will be talking about that, yes.
Any last things from the board for the good of the order? Okay. Mr. Ward, any last comments?
Appreciate everybody's service.
Thank you very much. Well, we will adjourn this meeting until the next regular meeting of the Del Norte Solid Waste Management Authority, scheduled for 4 p.m. Tuesday, February 18th, 2025, right here at the Flint Center.
Thank you. It has a variety of things for